Smile, written and directed by Parker Finn, and The Babadook, written and directed by Jennifer Kent, come from England and Australia respectively. And although they are separated by several oceans and thousands of miles, they share immense similarities. I am not talking about plagiarism or inspiration. I am talking about several connections that have been overlooked by many. These are two amazing horror movies, and they should be on every horror fan's watch list. In this video, I am going to talk about the things that connect The Babadook and Smile. So the way I would do it would be pretty simple. I'll explore the monsters from the two movies one after another, and then answer the question we have gathered here to know the answer to. But before I begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those two small clicks for you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's begin. What's the origin story of the Babadook? The Babadook doesn't really have that much of an origin story or a backstory. It is primarily a cursed artifact and an anagram for a bad book, so it does not particularly have any detailed origin myth. It is pretty much found inside a strange pop-up book that almost always lands in the wrong hands at the worst possible time. When single mother Amelia finds it on a shelf and reads it to her son Samuel, she unknowingly invites the thing into their lives. The interesting thing is that the book's rhyme doesn't try to hide things either. When it says, and I quote, "If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook." And much like the first scene of any Shakespearean plays, these words set the tone for what's coming. As for the creature itself, it is a tall, gaunt figure in a black trench coat with a top hat, long claws, and a face drained of anything human. In fact, he slightly reminds me of the Crooked Man. The name Babadook comes from the sound it makes. Ba-ba-dook, dook, dook. Three knocks that usually happen before things get worse. The film never confirms whether it's a demon, ghost, or something else entirely. Maybe an otherworldly cosmic entity, you know, something Lovecraftian. But then again, this vagueness is deliberate. It lets the Babadook live as a shape-shifting force of dread tied to the person reading the book. It exists because it's seen, heard, and feared. How does the Babadook operate? Once the book gets open and read, the Babadook self-invites itself inside the home like a distant gambling addict uncle no one likes. It clings to fear and grief, feeding off the emotional mess of the people it targets. At first, it keeps its distance. You only get flashes, something moving where it shouldn't, a shadow too solid in the corner of the room, noises without a source. But as fear grows, so does the confirmation of its presence. The more rattled Amelia and Samuel get, the stronger and more aggressive it becomes. The thing about the Babadook is that it doesn't stick to one trick. There is, of course, the classic horror movie tropes in the movie, but it also gets into the heads of its victims. Amelia finds broken glass in her food. She hears knocks that don't come from anywhere. These little moments isolate her. People around her think she's losing her grip on reality and her mind, and that's exactly what the Babadook wants. It even breaks through media. There's a scene where it shows up during a television broadcast, distorting what's real and what's not. Over time, it breaks down Amelia. Sleep-starved and anxious, she grows paranoid and starts lashing out and begins to unravel. What are its methods of attack? The Babadook doesn't settle for scaring someone into a panic. It plays the long game. It wants possession. It wants collapse. Once it digs deep enough into Amelia's grief, it manages to take control of her mind and body, turning her into a weapon. Under its influence, she kills the family dog and nearly kills her own child. This is what the Babadook wants: destruction from the inside out. Its goal isn't chaos for the sake of it. It wants irreversible loss. It twists everything. It uses speed, height, invisibility, the ability to scale walls, and even impersonates Amelia's dead husband. All of that gives it the upper hand, but its strongest weapon is psychological. It doesn't attack the body first, it attacks the heart. And in this case, it uses Amelia's buried sorrow as fuel. Every time she denies her pain or pushes it aside, the Babadook comes back stronger. There's no banishment ritual. There's no priest with a cross. Just a mother getting closer and closer to the point of no return. At the peak of possession, something shifts. Samuel, in danger, snaps Amelia out of her trance, and when she finally turns on the Babadook, not with fear, but with fury, she fights back. She threatens it, tells it to stay away from her child, and her anger, the motherly protective kind, pushes the entity back. It doesn't vanish in a puff of smoke. Instead, she throws up a black, tar-like substance, almost like the Babadook is being purged from her body. It flees to the basement, slinking away into the dark with its power weakened. What happened in the end? Even after all that, the Babadook doesn't disappear. Amelia and Samuel keep it locked in the basement. Amelia brings it bowls of worms for the Babadook to eat. It hunches in the dark, waiting. This part did throw me off a bit, and in a good, smart way, because it was not a clean victory. The Babadook doesn't die or vanish from their lives entirely because she read the book, and it has latched itself onto the family of two. That said, it's no longer running the show either. Amelia chooses to manage it on her own terms. That's her survival strategy. Not to destroy the monster, but to accept it without letting it define her life. By the end, she reconnects with her son. They share laughs again. She finally celebrates his birthday on the day it actually falls, which is also the day her husband died, a date she has ignored for years. That shift points and leads to something deeper, like something was finally unlocked and set her free, like a bird in a cage. Amelia's finally back in the world, but she goes a step ahead and manages to make peace with the loss that haunted her. And that's the key to the Babadook. It was never just a horror movie villain. It was grief given shape, depression in physical form. The story tracks closely with the stages of grief: denial, anger, fear, and finally, acceptance. Once Amelia stops pushing her sorrow away and confronts it, the Babadook loses its grip. But the film makes one thing clear: some things don't go away. Some pain stays, and sometimes you live with it in the basement and feed it worms. And now, let's analyze the smile entity before we finally bridge the distance between the two to find similarities. The Smile Entity. The evil force behind the 2020 movie has no official name. Fans refer to it as the Smile Entity or the Monstrosity, and so will we. However, in the film, it stays unnamed. Just a curse that keeps moving from one person to the next. Much like the Babadook, it's not tied to any ancient object or location. But unlike the Babadook, this one isn't a haunted book or a cursed artifact. The Smile Entity acts more like a viral parasite, one that jumps between people under very specific conditions. There's no backstory about where it came from or why it exists. No gods, no cult, no origin myth. All we know is how it spreads, and that part is disturbingly efficient. It latches on to trauma. Every time someone dies by suicide in front of a witness, the entity shifts to that person, the witness. That very act, someone ending their life with a grin while another watches, is what keeps the curse alive. The moment the witness sees that death, they become the next host. Therapist Rose Cotter enters the cycle when she watches a patient, Laura, take her life during a session. The grin Laura wears isn't hers. It belongs to the thing inside her. Rose begins investigating and uncovers that Laura had seen her professor die the same way. Each link in the chain carries the same pattern. Someone dies, someone watches, the curse moves on. There's no break in the chain, unless you murder someone. I'll come to this later. The Smile Entity uses pain to survive. Each traumatic death it creates ensures another one follows. It's a closed system of suffering, like a psychological version of The Ring, or It Follows. Except here, the medium isn't a tape or sex. It's raw, visible trauma. How does it operate? Once the Smile Entity takes hold, it wastes no time in tormenting its new host. Its modus operandi is that smile, stretched wide, cold, and hollow. The cursed person starts seeing it everywhere. People around them, from strangers to loved ones, and even familiar faces from the past, suddenly freeze, staring with that unsettling grin. These aren't real people. The entity plays with perception. It makes hallucinations feel like reality. What's worse is that it wears the faces of people the victim trusts. It knows who matters to them, and it uses that to twist the knife deeper. Rose sees her dead mother, asking why she let her die. She sees her therapist's face distort mid-conversation. In one moment, things feel normal. In the next, reality warps into something evil, something otherworldly and grimdark, and no one else sees any of it. From the outside, the cursed person seems paranoid, erratic, and unwell. They talk to people who aren't there. They react to things no one else sees. This makes it easy for others to assume they're respiraling, which isolates them further. The Smile Entity also feeds on emotional trauma, such as fear, guilt, and instability. The more shaken the person gets, the tighter its grip becomes. As the haunting grows more intense, victims often lose touch with their support system. They lash out, panic in public, or shut themselves off. Rose, for example, starts having violent outbursts and ends up taking time off from work. As those around her lose trust, the entity gains ground. It isolates first, then it moves in for the kill. How much time does it take for you to meet your fate? Well, the Smile Entity doesn't rush. It breaks its victims slowly, drawing them into a spiral of terror and confusion. Most people only last a few days once the curse begins. Every day it brings more hallucinations, each worse than the last. Sleep offers no safety because, more often than not, nightmares bleed into waking moments and the wall between nightmares and reality breaks down, one brick at a time. Making it all worse, the Smile entity knows where to hit. It goes straight for the most painful memories. For Rose, that means her unresolved guilt over her mother's death. It shows her her memories, but does not stop there. It replays them with added malice, warping them into weapons of psychological trauma. The longer this goes on, the more likely the victim becomes to snap. And then the endgame begins. The victim acts out the final scene with a twisted grin on their face. The death is always brutal. A slashed throat, fire, shattered glass, whatever it takes to guarantee that someone else is there to see it happen. That witness becomes the next target, and the cycle begins again. The cruel part about these suicides is that they are executed with the most painful objects. I mean, imagine slitting yourself with shards of glass when compared to falling off a high-rise. The first one is more painful. Same difference as using a blunt knife to kill someone and using a longsword to behead someone. And when the final moment arrives, it is more than a suicide, it's a handoff. The entity possesses the victim in those final seconds and turns them into both killer and carrier. Every death under the curse follows this ritual pattern. The entity wants the act to stick in the memory of the observer. That trauma guarantees transmission. One man, Robert, manages to survive the curse, but not by breaking it. Instead, he finds a loophole. He kills someone else in front of a third party, forcing the trauma onto a new witness. It's a cold solution. Sacrifice a stranger to save yourself. That reveals how the entity really works. It's not about evil for the sake of it, it's about survival. And to survive, it needs fresh trauma, passed on through violence. Rose tries a different approach. She hopes to trap the curse by isolating herself. If she can die alone, the chain will end. She returns to her childhood home, the place where her trauma began, and prepares to face the thing directly. And it shows itself. No more disguises, no more borrowed faces. The Smile entity reveals its true form. A demented, skinless creature, every inch of it covered in layered jaws. It forces its way into Rose by literally pulling her mouth open and crawling inside her. That scene shows what the curse really is. Something you swallow, something that lives in you. But her final stand turns out to be a trick. What felt like victory, burning the creature, walking away, was another hallucination. In reality, she never escaped. The entity wins. Rose dies by fire, wearing the same hollow grin as all the others. Her friend Joel sees it. The curse moves on. By the end of Smile, nothing is resolved. The cycle continues unchanged. The entity isn't weakened. It isn't afraid. It doesn't need a motive. It survives by making sure others don't. And now, it's time to make our comparison. Parallels between the Babadook and the Smile entity. On the surface, the Babadook and Smile don't look alike. One leans into gothic dread, the other into psychological curse horror. But at their core, both stories orbit the same idea of supernatural forces that feed off human pain. They are predators that sniff out unresolved trauma, grief, and guilt, which only means that they are not the typical movie monsters. Once inside, they don't claw at the body, they go straight for the mind. In the Babadook, the creature embodies Amelia's grief. Her husband died violently, and she never really processed it. Years pass, but the pain stays locked away, ignored, and unspoken. That's when the Babadook appears. The more Amelia avoids her grief, the stronger the thing becomes. It doesn't sneak through doors or windows, it comes in through denial. Over in Smile, the entity works differently, but the pattern's the same. It doesn't need an invitation, it only needs someone to witness trauma. When a person watches someone die by suicide in a state of terror, the entity moves in, and once it's inside, it digs into the most painful corners of their mind. In one scene, a character outright explains it. The entity feeds on trauma and stays alive by making more. This makes every new death part of its survival mechanism. Both monsters treat inner wounds not as symptoms, but as the entry point, the thing that lets them in and keeps them fed. How do depression and isolation come into the picture? Amelia starts the story already sinking. She's a widow who lost her husband on the day of her labor. She's a mother stretched thin. Her nights are sleepless. Her grief is unspoken. The Babadook takes full advantage of all these things. Every time she pushes her pain aside or refuses to talk about her husband, the entity tightens its grip. It twists her emotions. One moment she's screaming, the next she's falling apart. The Babadook turns her into a storm of anger and despair, the worst kind. Rose, the lead in Smile, is in a similar headspace. She's already dealing with the weight of childhood trauma. She works long hours, often at the cost of her personal life. When the curse begins, she loses whatever support she had left. Her fiance distances himself. Her sister doesn't take her seriously. Like Amelia, Rose finds herself alone right when she needs people the most. Both films show how isolation isn't accidental, it's part of the process. Friends and family don't believe what the victims are seeing. Amelia's sister thinks she's spiraling. Rose's co-workers think she's having a breakdown. This disbelief makes things worse. The more they're dismissed, the more they unravel, and the less support they have, the easier it becomes for the respective entities, that is the Smile and the Babadook, to dominate them. Both women get boxed into their trauma with no escape, and the only thing left in the box is the monster. This actually points at a larger real-life question, the question of how mental illness is often misunderstood. In both films, characters try to rationalize the symptoms as psychosis or stress. No one listens. No one takes it seriously. That dismissal, that lack of belief, gives the entity more ground to cover. It isolates its prey emotionally and socially until the only voice left is its own. Weaponizing guilt and trauma. Neither the Babadook nor the Smile entity are here to scare one to death. They locate the exact source of guilt in a person's life and tear it wide open. Amelia's guilt, as I mentioned, comes from her husband, who died while driving her to the hospital to give birth to Sam. That timing leaves a scar that never quite fades. She can't even celebrate Sam's birthday on the actual day because it overlaps with her husband's death. She tries to push that aside, but the Babadook doesn't let her. It confronts her with her own repressed thoughts. At one point, it even takes the form of her late husband, Oscar, and whispers for her to give up the boy, like some kind of a trade, a pretty sick one. That moment forces her to face the uncomfortable truth. Some part of her might still associate Sam with that tragedy. That guilt festers. The Babadook feeds off it and nearly drives her to kill her own child. In Smile, Rose carries a different kind of guilt. Her mother died by suicide, and Rose was the only one there. She was a child at the time, too young to know what to do, but she froze. She never called for help. That silence, that moment of fear, has haunted her ever since. The Smile entity doesn't leave that alone. It brings her mother's voice back. It shows her that moment again, twisted into something even worse. The message is clear. You let her die. That accusation breaks Rose down more than any monster could. It takes what she already fears is true and throws it back at her without mercy. These monsters pick people who are already punishing themselves, and then they push them further. They gaslight you like a toxic ex. They manipulate. They make the victims believe they deserve the suffering. That's why both Amelia and Rose end up teetering on the edge, because the enemy isn't always outside. Sometimes it lives in the same room, wears the same face, and sounds like your own thoughts. Facing the monster equals facing the pain. Both the Babadook and Smile make one thing pretty clear. The only way to stop the horror is to face the pain that created it. But the sad part is that even doing so doesn't guarantee that you would survive. These aren't creatures that get banished with spells or blown apart with weapons. Their weakness lies in the human heart, and that's where the fight has to happen. Amelia wins because she finally looks her grief in the eye. Instead of stuffing it down or pretending it's gone, she acknowledges it. When she confronts the Babadook and shouts at it, telling it to stay away from her son, she breaks the hold it had over her. That moment isn't just about protecting her child, it's about reclaiming control from the thing that's been quietly eating away at her since her husband died. The Babadook falters not because it's afraid of her voice, but because she's no longer afraid of what it represents. Rose tries the same route. She heads back to the house where everything started, kinda like what they do in The Haunting of Hill House. Her idea is simple: cut off the cycle by removing the next witness. If she can isolate herself and deal with the entity alone, maybe she can stop it for good. She sees the specter of her mother and sets it on fire, a symbolic purge of the guilt she's carried ever since childhood. It feels like victory, but Smile doesn't let that ending land. The film pulls back the curtain and reveals the entire confrontation as a mental illusion. Rose never be the entity. Her unresolved guilt never really left. It waited in the background, quiet but alive, and when the moment came, it took over. Her final act of self-immolation in front of Joel proves that fear still had a foothold. The curse moves on, and Rose becomes another link in the chain. That contrast between endings shows the full weight of the theme. Amelia confronts her grief and learns to live with it. Rose confronts her, but doesn't fully let it go. Both women try to stop their monsters by turning inward, but only one walks away. And neither of their monsters can be fought through physical means. You can't shoot guilt. You can't cut trauma out of your mind. Amelia's defense is her emotional clarity and her love for her child. Rose tries to rely on solitude and personal strength, but the Smile entity finds the cracks. Both monsters serve as metaphors. The Babadook has long been seen as a metaphor for grief and depression. It doesn't vanish at the end and remains locked away in the basement, fed and monitored. That detail matters. Amelia doesn't destroy it. She accepts that it's part of her life. The monster becomes a living metaphor for how loss never really disappears. You don't erase it, you manage it. The Smile entity does something slightly different. Its entire method of transfer, trauma witnessed, trauma inherited, is a blunt commentary on how emotional pain spreads. One person breaks down, and that collapse creates a ripple. In Smile, the ripple turns literal. Every victim becomes the next source of damage. It's a dark reflection of real-world consequences. When someone takes their life, the grief left behind doesn't stay still. It moves, it infects, it reshapes others. Both stories touch on how silence and stigma amplify suffering. Amelia can't talk about her husband's death because society expects her to move on. Rose is written off as unstable, even though she's dealing with something real. No one listens, no one steps in. That isolation is what both monsters need. It's the perfect breeding ground for pain to grow. And there's the worst part, the pass-it-on logic. In Smile, the only proven way to survive is to kill someone else in front of a witness. That's not a metaphor for hope. It's a metaphor for damage, for how pain, when ignored or suppressed, spreads in toxic, violent ways. Rose tries not to pass it on, but her failure shows how hard it is to escape the pull of untreated trauma. Both films ask the same question, a very important question that we should ask ourselves. What happens when you don't face your inner demons? And both answer without sugarcoating. You don't get peace, you get consumed. Legacy of trauma. You can't just get rid of it. When the dust settles in both films, one message that remains with you as the credits roll is that trauma doesn't vanish when ignored. Amelia figures that out the hard way. Every time she tried to push her pain aside, the Babadook grew stronger. Only when she acknowledged it, without letting it run her life, did she start to heal. Rose's outcome mirrors the opposite. She dives headfirst into the heart of her trauma, but some part of her still clings to fear. That piece lets the Smile entity finish the job. Where Amelia adapts, Rose buckles. These monsters may look different. One wears a coat and hat, the other hides behind distorted faces, but they aim for the same target. They don't chase their victims through forests, they wait inside the mind. They feed on shame, regret, and silence. That's what makes them effective, and that's what makes them real. Neither the Babadook nor the Smile entity gets destroyed. One ends up locked in a basement, the other moves on to someone new. That matters. It shows how these aren't stories about winning. They're about surviving. The Babadook offers a light at the end. A small one, but it's there. It says you can keep going, even if something dark stays with you. Smile doesn't offer that. It's a warning. Trauma left untreated doesn't fade, it grows. In the end, both films show the same thing in different ways. Together, these films give us two sides of the same idea. One is about managing grief and surviving it, the other is about being swallowed by it. In both, the horror isn't a monster from outside, it's a shadow that rises when the lights go out inside you. The Babadook and the Smile entity don't just scare, they expose. They remind you that the scariest things are the ones that already live in your head. The Babadook and the Smile entity aren't just monsters, they're metaphors given form. They're guilt with claws. They're sorrow that can speak. And once they enter, they don't let go until you face what brought them in. Amelia and Rose don't just fight a creature, they fight themselves. And that fight doesn't always end in victory. Sometimes it ends with acceptance. Sometimes it ends in fire. But either way, it starts the same way, with pain left unspoken and a monster that knows exactly where to look. That was all in this one, folks. See you in the next one. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe, and thanks everyone.